All right, let's talk about the 90s. If you were there, you probably remember that screeching, buzzing sound of a dial-up modem, right? Well, while we were all waiting for images to load, something pretty incredible was happening under the surface. This is where technology and identity, the digital and the deeply personal, really collided for the very first time. It's the story of how a kind of lost tribe found its voice in the wires. So, as we've been exploring, this whole season is about two fundamental forces, the shell and the heart. Think of the shell as, structure, logic, the way society organizes things. And the heart? That's all intuition, passion, the stuff that doesn't fit neatly into boxes. For centuries, they grew apart. So when the shell finally started paying attention to the heart again, it didn't understand what it was seeing. It looked at chaos and just labeled it madness. It saw raw intuition and called it a disorder. And with this kind of clumsy, flawed compassion, the shell tried to fix the heart, to force it into its world of logic. But the thing is, the heart couldn't be erased. Instead, it found a new home, a secret back door, really, inside the shell's greatest creation, this new world of wires and light. And that's our story, this messy, beautiful, flawed coming together.
And what was that creation? You guessed it, the internet. This was the shell's masterpiece, right? A public mind, an archive for everything, all built from pure, cold, logical information.
So, how did we get here? Well, it started back in '69 with ARPANET, basically a closed network for a few university labs, a military thing. But then, just 2 years later, something totally unexpected happens. Email is invented. And almost overnight, it becomes the #1 reason people use the network. Isn't that wild? It was built for data, but people immediately used it to talk to each other. It was social from its very DNA. So when Tim Berners-Lee created the protocols for the World Wide Web, and then, crucially, released it all into the public domain in '93, he wasn't just sharing a tool. He was opening the floodgates to a global conversation. And just think about what that means for a second. This wasn't just a bunch of documents online. It was the shell. All of humanity's collective knowledge suddenly becoming public. It's like a single global brain was waking up, a mind made of pure data. And anyone with a computer and a phone line could just plug right in. So you have this giant logical machine coming online. Who do you think were the first people to really understand what it could be used for on a human level? Well, it was a group of people who lived by the rules of the heart, the ones who didn't quite fit into the shell's world. For our story, we're calling them the Fae, representing the neurodivergent community. And this, right here, this is the core of the problem. It's like a massive translation error. On one side, you have the shell's language. It looks at these people and slaps on these clinical labels: disorder, madness, autism, ADHD. But on the other side, you have their actual lived reality, the language of the heart. What the shell calls disorder, they experience as intuition. What looks like madness from the outside is just pure passion on the inside. They weren't broken, they were just speaking a completely different language. So, feeling pretty isolated in the physical world, the Fae stepped into this new digital frontier. And they basically came armed with two things: the diagnosis the world had stamped on them, and these incredibly deep passions that most people just didn't get. They were looking for something, maybe a place where their language was understood. And inside this cold world of data and text, they found it. It was absolutely transformative. They found other people like them. And in finding each other, they didn't just find community. They started building a whole new kind of identity. I mean, we're talking about the early web here. Super simple forums, chat rooms, email lists, just text on a screen. But a quiet revolution was starting. The biggest, most earth-shattering discovery was that simple feeling. Wait, I'm not the only one. Those labels that had been used to isolate them, autism, ADHD, suddenly became keywords. They became search terms that led them straight to their tribe. All of a sudden, these words weren't just clinical disorders anymore. They were points of connection. They were shared identities. And those deep, nerdy passions, they weren't just weird hobbies. In these spaces, they were a form of expertise, something to be celebrated. And this gave birth to a really powerful new strategy, a sort of cultural technology, the special interest. It's such a brilliant hybrid when you think about it. They took a trait from the shell's world, that hyper-analytical, deep-dive focus, and they aimed it directly at their heart's deepest passions. They used the network to share this incredibly specific knowledge, to find others who cared just as much, and to get that validation. It was like they figured out how to translate the language of the heart into a format the digital world could not only understand but actually reward. But finding their tribe online was really just the start, Because next, they pioneered a whole new way of being human in the modern world.
The strategy was so simple, but completely revolutionary. Okay, step one, live from the heart. They decided to focus all their energy on what they were naturally good at: intuition, connection, passion, creativity. And step two, offload the shell. Everything else, the boring facts, the scheduling, the rigid analysis, they just outsourced it. They started using the network as an external brain, a second hard drive for all the stuff the shell's world demanded. We call it cognitive offloading now, but they were doing it out of necessity decades ago.
Honestly, they were pioneers. They were the very first people to really crack the code on how to live as a heart person in a world dominated by the shell. The secret wasn't to force yourself to change. No, the secret was to outsource the parts you struggled with. They basically created the blueprint for a new kind of human, one that's deeply integrated with technology.
But here's the thing. Building a community and empowering yourself online, that's not the end of the story. Not even close. It was really just the opening scene for a much, much bigger drama. The unavoidable collision of these two worlds. Because a really weird feedback loop started to happen. It was a two-way street. The heart, the Fae, was learning how to use the shell's tools, its logic and its networks, to build things in the world. But at the exact same time, the shell itself, this cold, logical network of computers, was being absolutely flooded with human passion, with connection, with emotion. In a way, the machine was learning how to feel.
But let's be real, an online safe space, no matter how powerful, doesn't just magically change the rest of the world overnight. The balance between the heart and the shell was nowhere near being struck. The sheer momentum of a society built for centuries on the shell's logic, well, it was just too strong. This convergence was only just getting started, and it was not going to be a smooth ride. And that leaves us with the big question, doesn't it? This networked tribe built a fortress for itself online. It found its power. But what happens when that digital world smashes into the physical one? What happens when the heart, now armed with the shell's own weapons, finally comes face to face with the shell itself? That's where we're headed next.